Hey guys, this is Infinite Flash here. Today I'm going to be talking about a game I analyzed about yesterday or in the past couple days that I found pretty interesting. Back in this game takes place in the 1920s, around the time when a lot of greats like Alekhine, Reddy, Grunfeld, Lasker, and a lot of these other players dominated the field with their genius-like play. And another founder of a lot of modern chess and game theory is this guy named Rubinstein. And today he's playing, today in the game I'm analyzing, he's playing Hromadka. And, normally Rubinstein is known more for his amazing rook endgame play. But today I'm just analyzing a game where he plays a brilliant positional and even tactical game. A lot of mixtures with the two. So Rubinstein's out with e4, and black plays e5, the king's pawn opening, and we have f4. Now in modern chess, we don't really see f4, and even in professional practice, you might see it at a lot of amateur levels below master level, but it's really not recommendable for a lot of good reasons. Black has a lot of responses versus f4 that pretty much give a half playable game or better, honestly. So in this game, theory wasn't really well developed back then. So you got to understand that everything's playable for both sides in this kind of position, and still a lot of theory has to be developed. And both sides are just more focused on getting their pieces out, and everybody just develops in this kind of position. Their pieces, and we can see that there's a really nice configuration for each side with very, very solid pieces in the center, and nothing's being threatened at the moment. And here's where we get the first really interesting move of the game here. Bishop g4, pinning this knight. And black's threatening knight d4 followed by knight takes f3, or this pin is really annoying with knight on d4. So white has to prevent that. So he played h3, and if black goes back, then you can put g4 and then trap the bishop over here. So, and another move like bishop e6 isn't really consistent with allowing h3 possibly followed by g4 at some point. So black logically takes, queen takes, and knight d4, gaining a tempo on the queen. And if white plays kind of this move, the normal move, queen d4, queen d1, defending the pawn on c2, I think black can just let's say just castles, or castles. And it's kind of difficult for white to develop his pieces. He can't really castle because of a discovered check here on c2. Winning material even, and he has to get his bishop active here so he can get it out, and a bishop d2 doesn't really look healthy at all, and bishop e3 always runs into this discovered check, as I already mentioned. So white would logically probably have to take here and try to get his bishop to g5, but here black doesn't really care about the pawn here, and you can already see that there's a lot of weak dark squares around white's king here. So black would retreat the knight and allow this queen to infiltrate into the white position. And in this position, white already has serious problems. Probably something like h4 is forced, and I would suspect that knight takes e5 is pretty bad for white to play in a practical game. Looks very uncomfortable in my opinion. So after knight d4, queen d1 isn't really the safest option in my opinion. White played queen g3, and at first this kind of looks absurd because black can say knight takes c2, and whoa, he's winning material with the rook on a1, but things aren't that clear. Now before we go on, I guess we can go through some of the alternatives other than knight takes c2. Black can also play knight h5, gaining a tempo on the queen first, and then possibly take. And white would play queen g4, attacking this knight, and black's idea is that I'm not letting the g7 pawn fall in this kind of position, and you're forced to take my knight here while I grab your rook, and I'm going to be ahead of material in this kind of position. And it's very much true. White is going to be down in material in this position after king d1, knight takes e5, queen takes here, and some move by black that develops the king side, probably queen e7 or castles, whatever it may be. But white can play f5, followed by rook f1, bishop g5, f6, and he has quite serious compensation in this kind of position. So that's definitely why knight h5 looks good on the surface because it attacks and really keeps the material on the board, but it's just not recommendable. And if black castles and ignores you entirely, now he's threatening knight takes c2, by the way. I believe that white should probably just bring his bishop back to defend the pawn here, and I think black would just take here. And this position is about roughly equal in my opinion. With bishop d2, white can think about castling on this side very soon. You can also think about bishop e3 in this kind of position at some point, if the knight doesn't come here immediately. This position is about equal in my opinion, and I think black wasn't really thinking about that kind of thing, trading off this so early. So he didn't really want to castle on this side either. Maybe he was nervous that white would probably bring some kind of kingside attack at some point, and that's kind of understandable. So sorry about that, guys. So after queen g3, black played the logical move queen e7. Okay, one other thing that I didn't really cover. Knight here. I think that white would play king d1 attacking the knight, and black is forced to play here. White takes the pawn here, and there's some really fascinating lines with king d7 that I saw, but that lead to a very interesting position. But I think the main line that I analyzed was just this simple one with rook f8, preserving the rook since it was under attack by the queen, and the f7 pawn that was attacked by the bishop here. That white would just take here, rook f1 first, getting on the f7 pawn, and black is forced to defend here. Otherwise, if something lands on f7, it's really dangerous, and bishop g5 putting on more pressure. And you'd think that white's actually going to be winning in this kind of position, but it's not so simple in view that black has the amazing move queen d4, allowing takes, castles, and this kind of position with queen takes c4 leads to some crazy lines after queen g4 check here, and I believe that the move was bishop here, takes here, and now takes. God, I'm trying to remember the line. This kind of line leads to quite a weird position with black having 3 pawns for the piece, and both sides having the queens on the board. If the queens were on the board, I think that white would easily be winning, but it's not so simple since black can give a lot of checks with the open king here. I think white should be better, but it is not so obvious how to find a winning plan. Maybe running the king over to the king's side eventually, over here. Finding some shelter over there would be the first idea. But other than that, I mean, it's not really that clear. And if white takes the rook here, I think you can insert this check right here. And this is already really dangerous for white. So, and by the way, you can't really capture on e7 first, because your queen kind of supported back in the defense. That's probably why white should insert the check first. And if he plays some check right now that the bishop is not on f6, black can play f5. So that's probably why the knight didn't really take the pawn immediately on there. And this is kind of why black played queen e7, which is a nice defensive move that kind of keeps everything together. So now white just took here, and black still can't take here because f7 is hanging, and this kind of position leaves the knight trapped in the corner. It's probably going to get lost after a, let's say, subsequent bishop g5 and rook f1 or king d2 even threatening to take it. There's no way to save the knight for black, and he'll be down material after that, and that's not what black wants. So he just recaptured in this kind of position after just taking the pawn here. And now white really has to react to this threat, as a move like queen takes g7 doesn't really do white any good, because now black gets some serious activity here and probably can just take here. So white played king d. Sorry about that. Takes. White just played king d1 in this position. Defending the pawn here. He doesn't want to really defend the pawn here. Not just because there's a diagonal here that's really annoying, but it's just kind of passive and it doesn't feel right. So he plays his king here, and he has a really solid plan with bishop e3 or bishop g5, moving the knight eventually to either d5 or knight e2, and taking out the knight out from this d4 outpost, followed by king c2, eventually completing his development. That's white's plan. And now black played this c6 move, kind of preventing this knight d5 move I just mentioned. So in this position, I think white just thought that b5 is a pretty good threat for white to deal with, and if b5 is played, I think the bishop has to drop back, and then black would probably take it at some point. And I mean, since black's castling queenside, this bishop was kind of attacking this pawn, and without the bishop on the board, it's not really so clear what the targets are in black's position. And as always, white can't really take care of this pawn, and there's a rook g8 and getting sun pressure on g2 with the king in the middle. That's not really helpful. So white played a patient, kind of prophylactic move against this b5 move with a4, and he also allows this bishop to get an extra square just in case it somehow kicked. And in this position, black could have played castles either way and been quite fine, but or even basically that. But he played this interesting move with g8, just defending the pawn. He's also kind of, it's just another move in the position. Castling either way was playable, but after this, white just played rook f1, developing, and he just played h6, preventing this bishop g5 idea. If black didn't do really anything, let's say he played like a5 or something, then we can imagine that bishop g5 attacking here and threatening to double the pawns with some weak light squares here eventually at some point. Maybe not immediately, but at some point might be really annoying for black. So black kind of played his own kind of prophylactic move with let's see if I can find it, with h6. And white still has to solve the development of his pieces over here. So he starts out with the good move, in my opinion, with knight e2, threatening to just take this knight off the board. Yeah, in this position, black just castled, but maybe he should just prevent this capture followed by c3 and the king getting to c2 with knight takes e2, king takes e2, and maybe bishop d2, and this position's fairly unclear with the king here, but it's really safe in this position, this king. I wouldn't mind playing white, but I wouldn't mind playing black either in this kind of position with the king on e2. It's pretty interesting stuff that that can be played for either side. So white played knight e2, and instead of taking, he just castled in this position. When white just continued with this plan of taking followed by c3. And I guess one other thing that you can consider is rook takes d4, but this runs into bishop e3, and white's kind of threatening just taking and c3, stabilizing the position, or just c3 immediately. And I mean, if black doesn't want to go back and be slightly worse, he can probably just sacrifice this kind of exchange and maybe check first. Sorry about that. Check. And try to attack these pawns on light squares. It's probably not enough compensation, honestly. But otherwise it doesn't really make sense to take with the rook. Probably you would just take here with the bishop, and if you take with the pawn, I mean, you're kind of solving white's positional problems with the pawn on d4. This is kind of what white wants. You closing the center with the pawn on d4. You lost all your dynamic play with that kind of move, and you allowed white to go bishop f4 since the pawn is not here. White actually is close to being much better in this position since he has two nice bishops and really active pieces here. So black wouldn't take with the pawn. He just took with the bishop, which is logically the best move. And then white continued with c3, and attack the bishop. And black goes back here. I think b4, gaining a tempo on this bishop already is quite annoying for black. So he just went here straight up, and white continued with this tempo gaining move and a space gaining move, possibly threatening a6 at some point. So, and then black played bishop c7. A nice defensive move. Maybe he's just kind of overprotecting the pawn, and although this move is forced, it's not so obvious how to break through black's structure. Now bishop e3. Now that this bishop's off this diagonal, white can bring his bishop over here and start to put pressure on the position. And black logically brought his king over here to defend the pawn. I mean, you don't want to play a move like a6. This always weakens the dark squares. Always, it just feels kind of wrong with possible bishop e3 and queen e3, threatening a queen infiltration. This is also one idea. So black didn't want to weaken the structure, so he played king b8. And now white logically continued with king c2, getting his king out of the middle of the board here. So also he's kind of connecting his rooks and possibly threatening some other positional ideas. King c2 is just a useful move to make sure you don't run into any trouble. Yeah, in this position, I mean, black, it's hard to recommend a plan for black. Maybe he can push on the king side, but I think what he wanted to do in this position was move his king to a slightly safer spot in his I guess in his mind with king a8. But I don't really like the idea of king a8. Maybe a move such as knight h5, gaining a tempo on the queen, followed by this kind of position. But if you have to play a move like a6, this is not really comfortable. I guess one of the main points of king a8 is to allow bishop b8 to overprotect the pawn. I just realized that this is actually the main idea of king a8. So in this position, white played a really nice move, rook f3. And this is kind of a deep idea, but when you look at it further, the idea of rook f3 is to place the queen behind it. So if black plays like knight h5, white can play queen f2 in this kind of position, attacking this and attacking the f7 pawn twice. And instead of rook f3, white could also play b4 and be really quite okay. I mean, this is just another plan that white could play, but he just chose rook f3, kind of a prophylactic move against these knight moves. And in this position, black got really tired of defending passively, so he played knight d5 and getting a tempo on the bishop. And what black was counting on is this kind of move with e4 attacking both of these, and I don't think this is what he really wanted with, you know, the e-file opening up. So, you know, instead of allowing such like tactical complications, what you see a lot of grandmasters do, or even you know, a lot of good players do, is play it like really simple. He just played bishop g1, and now you're putting into the question of the knight what you want to do with it. So what he did was he actually just moved the knight here, and black doesn't really have a good waiting move here in this position. I mean, just takes, and the queen can probably drop back to f2, threatening checkmate in that specific position after he just takes. If, you know, black makes a waiting move, takes, queen f2, and now, you know, this bishop moves back while you're threatening mate at the same moment. This is actually, I don't know, maybe a better move, but you see the idea of white's threat there. So he just continued with knight f4 after, let's see if I can find it, knight f4, and, you know, I mean, white just continued with his idea of queen f2, bringing his queen to the attack, and we can kind of see g3 around the corner, followed by rook takes f7, and black has to address this threat of the a7 pawn, you know, being threatened with mate. So white just continues with his plan with g3, and you're kind of putting the question the knight, what are you going to do? If he goes back to g6, I mean, rook takes f7, and it's game over already, with so much pressure on the queen side, with, you know, every piece kind of contributing to the attack even. So black grabs the pawn, and rook takes f7, you know, grabbing the pawn, invading on the 7th rank. Yeah, in this position, black played queen d6, which is not the greatest move ever. And it looks logical, kind of avoiding the queen trade and, you know, keeping more pieces on the board with the knight h3, you know, kind of attacking the queen and the bishop here. But you know, it's not the greatest move, and we'll see why soon. You know, instead of queen d6, probably the best move was knight takes f2, you know, trading off this piece for the queen here, kind of a queen trade. And, you know, white's threatening bishop takes g8 here, so black has to move the rook, and white just grabs the pawn here on g7 when, you know, the knight has to move again, or, you know, black has to make some kind of move like this, trying to double in the f-file, getting some counterplay. But, you know, after these kind of moves, with a6 especially, is a very nice move that white can play. I mean, you got to be careful about not exchanging into an opposite colored bishop at game. Moves such as bishop takes f2, allowing this position probably gives black some decent drawing chances, but the bishop is just so bad here. So even then, white has good winning chances too, but there's no reason to allow this as white just can play slowly with a6, and his idea is after d6 he can play the amazing looking bishop e6 move. And, you know, the idea is very crude in this position. White just wants to play bishop d6, bishop d7, and bishop c6 checkmate. And, you know, there's not really a good way to meet that. I mean, it's really hard to move in this kind of position. White's also, you know, has the idea of somehow infiltrating, you know, once this, you know, if the b pawn ever moves, there's always this idea of rook a7 if the bishop's not here. And black eventually wants to move this bishop. It's just so bad, so kind of giving all these factors, he has to take here, but I mean, this kind of position with bishop d6, bishop d7, bishop c7, takes, and bishop e3 gives white an excellent position. You know, I don't think that this is playable at all for black. It looks terrible. So, I mean, that's, you know, black didn't like the look of that. I can understand that. And he just missed, you know, white's next move, which is quite understandable, really. So I guess I want you guys to pause the video and, you know, try to find white's next move. The queen is under attack. You know, you kind of have all these pieces really well developed. Let's see if you can find white's next move. I'm gonna wait about 3 more seconds till I tell you the next move. Alright, white played queen b6, kind of bringing, these checkmating patterns on the board, right? And this kind of ends the game immediately in a very, very cool style. This queen b6 move is one of my favorite moves that I've ever seen. And the main point is, you're wondering that, what if black takes? Well, then white would take here, and you have this forced sequence of just checks after checks. And in this position, I like the move bishop a6, threatening a bunch of checkmates. Every move with the rook is practically checkmate. Rook c7 is double checkmate even. So black has to not take, obviously take the queen. That's a pretty strong threat. And a move like bishop c7 already drops there. So black logically defends the 7th rank against this queen b7 idea with rook d7. But I think he missed white's next move, which was that you had to see in advance bishop c5 attacking the queen. And this is already a huge disaster. There's no way to save the position even. A move like queen c7 looks logical, but it allows this kind of continuation when the rook is hanging at the end of the line on g8 with the bishop on c4. That's why that we saw rook f8 in the other line that black could have played. And after bishop c5, black didn't see anything better than rook takes f7. And there's not really anything better, really, when white just took the queen here, and black gave this check, and white chose the safest and easiest option. Queen takes, knight takes, bishop takes here, and bishop takes d6. And he just resigned, actually, after queen takes f2, knight takes f2, and bishop takes here. So yeah, overall, it was quite a, also, by the way, black can move the rook here, but it doesn't really help his position at all. Sorry about that, give me a second. Well, he actually doesn't have a choice, never mind. So yeah, he just resigned in this position, knowing that he's going to be down material. So yeah, this was quite a really, really interesting game where, if we go back, where white kind of castled manually, in a way, with taking this almost looking risky move with queen g3, calculating all these tactics with knight takes c2, and eventually developing his pieces towards the king's side, kind of coordinating with those pieces and getting his king out of the center when he was finally able to coordinate his pieces over there. And I guess knight d5 is desperation, but you can't really blame black for playing kind of a move like that. And after bishop g1, it's just tough to play this kind of position. And white just broke through so easily, and it's so easy to miss queen b6. But I guess black didn't really have any better than queen d6 in a practical game. Rubinstein wouldn't miss a move like that. It's just a very beautiful move, in my opinion. Alright guys, I hope you found that a little bit instructional, maybe a little bit entertaining. Leave any comments if you're wondering about a variation or two. Hope I can answer your questions. This is Infinite Flash signing out.